Hey folks, Darren here, Mr. Sandsman, back with another 10-minute ranking, and this one I put out to you guys to a vote. Now, this one didn't win the poll, but a lot of you over the last few weeks have suggested this to me, so I thought I'm going to do this first. I am going to do the other ones that were in the poll as well. So there was a Scream ranking, there was a Romero ranking, and also the Myers masks as well, which I'm going to record and get those out to you very soon. But this one is soundtracks, horror movie soundtracks. Now, I'm more of a kind of 70s, 80s kind of soundtrack guy. I like a bit of synth. I like a full orchestra as well, but I do like a bit of synth. A bit of Carpenter, a bit of Simonetti, that kind of thing. So you are going to find that my net for soundtracks has a number of similar type of sounding movies in there. That's just me. That's just the way I roll with these things. But let's start. So I'm just going to move to this screen here and show you number 10. So there is a comedian called Eddie Izzard, and he joked one time about the fact that horror movies with kids singing in them are not worth their salt. However, I do think that the Amityville Horror is a great soundtrack. Lalo Schifrin's score for this film really captures the mood of the film, particularly in some of the more scarier moments. You almost have these like Bernard Herrmann strings in some of the scenes, but it's the kids singing in the background, that kind of overture that you hear throughout the movie that really gets to you. It's kind of creepy, and some of his scores are excellent. I mean, in particular, I love Dirty Harry as well. But in terms of horror, Amityville Horror is one of my favorite movies that he scored. Number 9 is George A. Romero's Day of the Dead, which is scored by John Harrison. John Harrison's a bit of an all-rounder. I think he's done a bit of acting, producing, directing, scoring. I think he was even first assistant director on Creepshow. But it's his score for Day of the Dead, which I have here, signed by the man himself. You can see that there. Which I think is terrific. And this is the expanded score. And Day of the Dead's one of those movies that I've always felt really walled in by. Every time I watch it, there's this sense of claustrophobia as all these soldiers are stuck in this bunker underground where the living dead are walking the streets above them. And his synth score for this film really, really does kind of capture the mood of the movie, particularly when we see the more emotional sides of Bub in the film. I get to some people that it's a little dated and it's somewhat different to some of the music that we got in Dawn of the Dead, but it does really stay with you, and it's one of the more memorable things about the movie, I think. And you get that kind of collaboration of synth and rock guitar in this, which I think really gels well. So yeah, Day of the Dead is my number 9. Next is Tenebrae from Dario Argento. Goblin did the soundtrack to this film. I don't actually have the CD for this. I would actually really like it, but I don't have it. I do have this wonderful 4K box set version here from Arrow. The movie's fantastic itself. It's about a writer who goes to Rome to promote his latest novel, and a series of murders start to happen that kind of mirror what he's been writing. It's a terrific, terrific murder mystery with some of the most beautifully executed murder scenes. It really is a joy to watch, and one of my favorite Giallo films. Probably is my favorite Giallo film, actually. But around that time, Goblin and Claudio Simonetti did a number of Giallo soundtracks. So you had things like Deep Red, you had Suspiria, Tenebrae, of course. They also did Dawn of the Dead, and Contamination as well, which, well, not a Giallo film, it's an Italian splatterfest in its own right. Yeah, love this soundtrack to this film. A little disco-y in parts, but a very kind of catchy signature tune to this movie. So Tenebrae is my number 8. Number 7 is Pino Donaggio's score for Piranha. I don't have this score. I would really like it, but it costs a fortune. It was released a few years ago as a very limited edition, and it's so difficult to get hold of. I think you're going to pay hundreds of pounds for this. I do have the recent 4K Ultra HD version of the movie, which I absolutely adore. But yeah, Pino Donaggio did a lot of great scores in the kind of late 70s, early 80s. Things like Don't Look Now. What else did he do? He did The Howling, he did Dress to Kill, and his score for Piranha is really haunting. Every time I watch this movie, I get really creeped out by the kind of the synths that he uses in this score. He uses a lot of orchestral stuff as well, but there's a lot of synth in it as well. And it's a very eerie tone that he uses when the piranhas attack. It's always stayed with me since I was a kid, this movie. And so Pino Donaggio's Piranha is at number 7. Number 6 is Rick Wakeman's score. Yes, Rick Wakeman, he from Yes, the keyboard man. His score for The Burning. Again, The Burning's not a soundtrack that I own. It is available on a lot of streaming services, but I've never actually been able to get hold of a copy. I do have, though, to show you this wonderful Burning steelbook, which I've had for a little while now. Burning, which I ranked as one of my favourite non-franchise slashers the other day, and one of my favourite slashers all round. Rick Wakeman's score for this film is batshit. It really is. I mean, it 1 minute it sounds like a helicopter rotor, and then the next thing you've got theremins in the background. It really is adventurous. It's kind of that proggy feel that you get from a band like Yes, and I think it fits the movie perfectly. So I'm going to put Rick Wakeman's The Burning at number 6. John Harrison back again at number 5, Creepshow. The score for Creepshow plays like a haunted house throughout. It really does have a wide range of creepy, different signature tunes, one for each kind of little segment of the movie. I have my own personal copy here. I don't know if you can see it's signed again by John Harrison. One of my favorite scores of all time. A shame that they didn't include it in the subsequent sequel and TV series, because I would have loved to have heard it on that. But there are some really haunting tunes in this, especially in the segment of The Crate and Something to Tide You Over. And even Father's Day as well. Father's Day's got some really creepy stuff. It also has Don't Let Go on there, which is one of those library tunes that we use on the end of the Slaughtered Lamb movie podcast. That kind of disco theme that Ed Harris dances along to. So John Harrison's Creepshow is my number 5. Okay, number 4. It was very difficult to rank the top 4 because I love all these soundtracks kind of equally, and they can change from time to time. One morning I'll wake up and I think this soundtrack is the better soundtrack, and then another day I'll wake up and it's something completely different, but it's always one of these 4. First off is Zombie, Goblin, or Dawn of the Dead, as most people will know it. Claudio Simonetti again, with his band Goblin, and they just do a terrific job in this film. There's a lot of library music in the film, but the actual tunes that Goblin recorded for it are terrific, and I think they're put to better use in Argento's European cut. It's one of those movies that really benefits from Goblin's score, whether it's the opening scene in the TV station, or whether it's the scene in the mall where the Scirocco that they steal is spinning its wheels, and we get into that really kind of groovy spinette type piano rock montage. There's some really cool stuff on there, and I just love what Goblin do. I once saw them play live and do the soundtrack live to Dawn of the Dead, and that was a really special evening. The night before that they did Dawn of the Dead, they did Suspiria. I didn't see that, but Suspiria's up there as being one of my favourite soundtracks as well, but didn't quite make the top 10. So yeah, number 4, Goblin and Dawn of the Dead. Agonizingly, there are no Halloween titles in the top 10 other than the original Halloween CD soundtrack that I have from John Carpenter. This is the 20th anniversary edition. Along with that, I also have this. Okay, so this was bought for me by my wife. I'm going to take this out of here. If you can see, this is the Mondo 2-disc soundtrack album. If you look closely, if I move this in, you can see the mouth is actually the is it the Wallace House? Yeah, the Wallace House. But inside, I was lucky enough to have this. Hold it there. Darren, You Can't Kill the Boogeyman, signed by John Carpenter. I think this is worth a pretty penny now. People tell me to hang on to this because it's very rare and difficult to get hold of. So that's one of my prized possessions. It's number 3 in the ranking. I couldn't include any of the other Halloween soundtracks because I didn't want to. I do love all the Halloween soundtracks, even Halloween 3. But I always think that without that original, you wouldn't have any of the others. So the original movie soundtrack is my favorite of the whole franchise. Unfortunately, it's sitting at number 3 because I do believe that the 2 soundtracks that I'm going to talk about next are superior to it. And they are soundtracks that I can listen to more than Halloween, because Halloween's kind of repetitive. So, number 2 is... Some people won't call this a horror film. I don't care. I do. I think it's got some of the most horrific moments in cinema in this film. Jaws. This is the 2CD expanded edition. Very lovely version that they brought out a few years ago of this, probably about 10 years ago now. When this came out, I was staggered at the amount of extra music that they found to put on here. It is one of the greatest soundtracks ever made. Favorite tracks on here are, I think Man Against Beast is my favorite track on here, which is where the shark first comes out of the water and they start shooting the first barrel into it. What can I say? One of the greatest movies of all time, one of the greatest soundtracks of all time, and I'm sure David Leckie, you will be pleased that I've included it, but not pleased that it isn't number 1. But number 1, some of you won't agree with my number 1 choice, but I just think it is one of the most haunting soundtracks ever made, and that is John Carpenter's The Fog. I absolutely adore this movie. I adore the soundtrack as well. Again, an expanded edition that came out probably around about 10 years ago, I think. Very lovely dual CD edition. This soundtrack, every time I listen to it, I find something new. Whether it's just a little couple of synth notes in the background, or an extra, or a voice, or something along those lines. I just think you go on a journey with this soundtrack, and it tells the story perfectly. There are tracks that actually make you feel like you're out at sea. There are tracks that actually make you feel like you're trapped. There's also that feeling at the end that not everything is over. You know, Father Malone goes back into the church and gets decapitated in lieu of being the 6th conspirator. And so when that end credit sting happens and the music rolls, you're so uneasy at that point. It's not like other movies that came out around the time that might either put a music track on there or something like that. This movie stays with you and lingers afterward. And I think it's all down to how perfect the soundtrack is. I know Carpenter tested this movie without a soundtrack and everybody hated it. It must have taken some guts to go away and write something that brought this movie together so well. And for that, it's my number 1. John Carpenter's The Fog. Okay, folks, that's it. That's my top 10 soundtracks of all time. You could ask me next week and it'll be something completely different. I am thinking about doing a soundtrack ranking that's more based on tracks that you hear in movies. You know, like the Lost Boys soundtrack, the Top Gun soundtrack, that kind of thing. This is more based around instrumental scores. And so I will think about doing something that incorporates those more kind of, those soundtracks that perhaps entered the charts. That's the way I can describe it. But thank you again, folks, for all the support. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you aren't subscribed, maybe consider it. And I'll be back soon, probably this weekend, with another 10-minute ranking. Kind of like doing these. Doesn't take long. You guys enjoy them. And it's a nice splinter project to the TSL Movie Podcast. So cheers, guys. I'll see you soon.